There are a lot of questions that need to be asked and need to be answered during the course of the college football season in the next couple of months. And we're inching closer and closer and closer to week 0. I can't wait. I know you're right there with me. But I picked out the top 10 teams in the AP poll and thought of one question I'd like to ask each head coach. And not because Deion Sanders is a jerk, but every coach, I could ask 15 questions of them to really, truly try to dive into who believes in the hype in 2024 and who has questions. And I think everybody has questions. There is not, you can argue that Georgia and Ohio State might be the two favorites. It might be in their own tier going into 2024, but that's why we play the games. And even those schools who are viewed as the odds-on favorites to hoist the trophy at the end of the season have questions. So here are the 10 questions that I would ask the top 10 teams in the AP poll going into 2024. The first question for Kirby Smart, you might think is kind of like a smart-ass question, but it's genuinely not. My question to Kirby Smart would be, what are you doing to make sure your players' conduct off the field won't be an issue during the season? Because it really hasn't been an issue during the season. The reckless driving, the speeding, drag racing that has gone on at Georgia generally hasn't happened or hasn't been an issue, or maybe hasn't been publicized during the season. It's been off the season stuff. But eventually I would have to think that, like, you got to be worried about it coming full circle during the season or during a bye week, during a week when you don't play somebody that's all that tough and your players aren't completely focused and locked in. So what are you doing? Because it's a legitimate question of your season can be derailed if some very important player gets caught doing something in a similar vein to what people have been critical of you for. What are you going to do? What are you doing to ensure that it doesn't happen? Because it's been a persistent issue. And I'd like the answer to that question. At Ohio State, they have very good wide receivers, maybe the best running back room in the country, and what is widely viewed as the best defense in America. The offensive line has question marks. But I still think in a offense that has produced fantastic quarterback play from Ryan Day, I want to know, how much do you trust Will Howard? And I think, by the way, asking each question from these top 10 coaches, these top 10 teams, the idea being that there's going to be some like truth serum injected to these coaches that give you an answer. Because if you are asked Kirby Smart, what are you doing to make sure your players don't screw up and their stuff off the field doesn't cause an issue during the season? He's not going to answer that question. If I ask Ryan Day, how much do you trust Will Howard? He's not going to answer that question truthfully. But really, truly, deep down, how much do you believe? How much do you trust Will Howard is going to take you where you need to go? Because I think it's a fair and legitimate question. Because for all of the accolades that Ryan Day gets for being an offensive genius, and, like, by the way, you played with Ohio State's playbook on College Football 25, it's a whole different level of complexity and brilliance. It's great. I love it. He specifically chose Kyle McCord as a recruit, as his starter. He sought out players like Devin Brown and Lincoln Keenholz, who are the backup quarterbacks, who are not living up to maybe the potential hype. So you bring in somebody else who essentially got pushed out of their starting job at Kansas State. Now, I realize that the weaponry around Will Howard at Ohio State is going to be drastically different than at Kansas State. But how much do you trust that guy? I don't know. And I think you're going to find out eventually. sticking with the quarterback spot, at Oregon, I would love to ask Dan Lanning, what do you need from Dillon Gabriel to be a national championship caliber team? Because if your expectations of Dillon Gabriel, and by the way, Dillon Gabriel has had an illustrious college football career. He's thrown 125 touchdown passes in his career. He's played a lot of football. But if you need him to be the best quarterback in the country for you to have a chance to win the national championship, are you going to get that? Or do you need him to be good enough? Like, I don't need you to go out there and win us every game. But if you could not lose the game for us, that would be great. Because that, I think, is the difference in Oregon's aspirations and what their expectations are. Because I think they have, we are going to win the national championship aspirations. And I don't know that if you put all of that on Dillon Gabriel, if that is putting him in a position to succeed, therefore putting you in a position to succeed. I think Dillon Gabriel is a very good quarterback. But if you need him to be, and I've made this analogy before, you have like semis and trailers, right? Semis drive you to your destination, and trailers are along for the ride. Is Dillon Gabriel a semi, or is he a trailer? I think the jury might be out on that when it comes to a team with national championship caliber aspirations. He didn't have those at UCF. He didn't, I don't think, have those at Oklahoma. He's going to have them in 2024 at Oregon. But what do they need from him is a different question than what can he provide you. At Texas, I think the question is, how do you keep players humble and focused? Because there's a lot going on, right? There is a lot going on at Texas. Expectations are sky high. New conference, coming off a year where they feel like they probably could have, should have played for the national championship. You have the most famous, most popular backup quarterback in America with sitting behind one of the most recognizable and one of the best players and a Heisman hopeful at the starting quarterback position in Quinn Ewers. How do you manage all of that? I don't imagine that Arch Manning is all that difficult to manage. I think it's fair to assume that he knows his place. He knows who he is, where he is, what his role is, and that he's behind Quinn Ewers. But I can't help but imagine that there might be some faction of players who might think that if the season starts to go bad or they lose a game or two, that it might be time to turn it over to Arch Manning. All of those things happen. How do you get everybody locked in and focused on? Because Texas has one of the more difficult. You got Michigan, you've got Alabama, you've got Ohio, or you've got Oklahoma, you've got Georgia. There are big time Texas A&M. There are big time games for Texas on the horizon. Getting everybody focused and locked in for that long without a misstep is a difficult task. Can Texas do that? I've told, like, I am high on Texas. I think Texas is in that national championship caliber group. But thinking they should be there and being there are two different things. And being humble and staying focused are two things. Like I would say, how do you plan to manage that? How do you plan to get there? How do you plan to keep those kids locked in? Here's the question I would ask Steve Sarkisian. In Alabama, I would ask Kalen DeBoer, are you ready for prime time? Because Kalen DeBoer's Division I jobs have been at Eastern Michigan and Indiana and Fresno State, and then at Washington, which is a big deal. That's a big school. Washington is now in the Big Ten. But there's a difference between Washington and Alabama. And you are taking over for the greatest to ever do it. You're going to have a microscope. You're going to have a magnifying glass. You're going to be featured in primetime more often than not. You have a quarterback who got drastically better throughout 2023. And if that improvement, if that skill set continues to be enhanced, the sky is the limit for Jalen Milroe, and people will be looking at that. People will be looking at how much better or what your team compares to what a Nick Saban coach team. Nobody's going to play under the microscope as much as Kalen DeBoer and Alabama will in 2024. Are you ready for it? I think the answer to that is yes. I've been on the record. Kalen DeBoer is a very, very, very good football coach. But this is a different set of circumstances that requires maybe you to do things differently than you have done in the past. Are you adaptable? Are you ready for prime time? Because I think the answer to that is yes. But if you're not, it's not going to be a fun 2024. Ole Miss is ranked 6th. And I find this phenomenon to be incredibly interesting. I would ask Lane Kiffin, can you stop the seesaw streak? If you look at Lane Kiffin's head coaching records after his 1 year at Tennessee, since he's been to USC, his records are in order 8-5. Then he went 10-2. Then he went 7-6. Then he got fired at the start of his 4th year at USC when they started 3-2. Then he went to Florida Atlantic. Went 11-3 his first year. 5-7 his second year. 10-3 his third year. Got to Ole Miss. 5-5. Then went 10-3. Then went 8-5. Then went 11-2 in 2023. So you go from winning, 10 games, having 2 or fewer losses, essentially, back down to either a losing record, a 500 record, or losing 5 games. You went 11-2 in 2023, and people are looking at you to be a playoff contender. I don't know what that means, what that says about Lane Kiffin or what the programs that he runs, that you go from 10-3, 5-5, 10-3, 8-5, 11-2. You have to have consistency. Can you be consistent? Can you be 10-2 in 2024? Because that's the expectations from people. The expectations are Ole Miss is going to make the college football playoff and be right behind the Alabama, Texas, Georgia group that can win the SEC in most people's eyes. Can you stop the seesaw streak? It's an interesting question, and it's an interesting situation where that just keeps happening to Lane Kiffin, where it bounce back and forth, bounce back and forth, bounce back and forth. The expectations are high. Are you going to be a 10-win team or better in 2024? Because history shows you don't follow up great performances with another great performance. Notre Dame's number 7. I'd love to ask Marcus Freeman, how comfortable are you with plan B if Riley Leonard goes down? If Riley Leonard gets hurt, how comfortable are you with plan B? Because Riley Leonard is a really interesting prospect at quarterback where he makes smart decisions with the football, can run a little bit. I don't think Riley Leonard is going to lose a ton of, I don't think Notre Dame's going to lose a game because Riley Leonard lost them the game. But if Riley Leonard gets hurt, how comfortable do you feel with plan B? Now, I don't think they're going to put the entire offense on Riley Leonard. I don't think it's going to be like he's got to carry them to success. But does plan B carry you to success? Or what does that mean for your offense should the worst happen? Michigan is number 8. And like I said, when I mentioned with Kirby Smart about asking, how do you make sure your off-field conduct doesn't affect your on-the-field play? But I wasn't being sarcastic. I wasn't being a smart aleck. I am being a smart ass with Michigan. I would love to ask Sharon Moore, who's going to serve as the interim head coach when you serve your suspension? Because it certainly appears as if the NCAA not all that thrilled with the Michigan football program. If Jim Harbaugh's getting a year-long suspension, Sharon Moore's on that staff. He knew about the recruiting violations that took place under Jim Harbaugh. And Sharon Moore deleted text messages as part of an investigation into the Connor Stallions incident, scandal. That hammer's going to drop eventually at some point. What does that look like for Sharon Moore? Who's going to coach as the interim head coach when you're serving your suspension? Is 100% a smart-ass comment. But I'd like the answer to it. Penn State's number 9. Penn State has had success under James Franklin when they have not really featured a traditional pro-style pocket passer, not necessarily a dual threat. When they have had a player like Trace McSorley, they reached the heights that they had reached. When James Franklin had Christian Hackenberg regressed from what he was as a freshman under Bill O'Brien to where, as a freshman, people were talking about, like, this guy's going to be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft when he comes out. And instead, he was maybe the most overhyped freshman quarterback in college football history because he didn't go on to do anything. He had a lackluster sophomore, a lackluster junior season, then did nothing in the NFL. And Penn State has a similar quarterback right now. Sean Clifford is now. Sean Clifford, I don't think, is in the same talent pool as Christian Hackenberg, but Sean Clifford was just okay, was above average as a college quarterback under James Franklin. And Drew Aller came to Penn State with a lot of fanfare, with a lot of expectations and hype. And there are people who say, Drew Aller can someday be a first-round NFL quarterback. I've yet to see that. And I don't know if that's him. I don't know if it's James Franklin. I don't know if it's the offense. But, there's a history here of guys having this specific archetype where they are pocket passers, kind of big guys with strong arms, and you haven't done a whole lot with them. So the question for James Franklin and Penn State are, what are you doing to make Drew Aller the best pocket passer in the country? How are you setting him up to be developed, to get better? Because he's good. I just don't know that he's at the level that people expect him to be, or that the projections are, this is an NFL-type player. Because I haven't seen that yet. What are you doing to make him the best pocket passer in America? Because I think that might be the ceiling for him, is the best thrower of the football in the country. But you got to help him get there. And I don't know what they're doing to do that. And the final question is to Florida State. Are you still motivated to prove everyone wrong? Because when the college football playoff is announced in December and you're 13-0, you've done everything you're supposed to do. And I think we could talk about this every day until the season started, to tell you the truth. You could play both sides of the aisle of who was right, who was wrong, why you should have looked at it this way, why you should have looked at it that way. But Florida State won the ACC, went undefeated, and did not make the college football playoff. And they were like, we're going to go out there and prove the doubters wrong. And you got your ass kicked by Georgia in the bowl game, which was not a fair fight. Lost a bunch of guys, people opting out, transfer portal, etc. Wasn't really a fair fight. So are you still motivated? Are you still willing, ready to do whatever it takes to prove everybody wrong? Because the expectations are that you're going to win the ACC again. You're going to get a first-round bye in the college football playoff. Can you use that anger that you felt in December, which it's been, you could have knocked somebody up that day and they'd popped out a kid by now. Are you still motivated and hungry and ambitious enough to use that as fuel in 2024? I kind of hope the answer is yes, because I'd like to see Florida State get back to where they were in the heyday of the Bobby Bowden years. I'd like to see Florida State as a borderline blue blood, where they're consistently one of the top dogs in the ACC. Because I think I'm very much not one of those people that are like, college football's better when Texas and Oklahoma and Notre Dame's good. Like, college football rocks all of the time. But is the ACC a little bit more interesting if there are a top dog or three and you're getting everybody's best shot week in, week out? That Clemson knows when they go to Boston College, by God, we're getting their best shot. When Florida State takes on Louisville, I know that you're going to give me all you got. I think so. I think it's a little bit more interesting. And I think you could argue both sides. Do they deserve to make the college football playoff? Yeah. Do they deserve to make the college football playoff? No. And that conversation is going to stop once we kick off the 2024 season, and they got a week 0 game, they're going to get a chance to impress everybody in America or make everybody in America question them and doubt them, depending on how things go in week 0. So those are the questions I'd ask the top 10 coaches in an AP poll. I would bet you good money those are not the top 10 coaches. They're not top 10 programs when we get to December. And maybe we'll do that throughout the rest of the season. Just, hey, here's a question I'd ask. I would ask Deion Sanders a question, and he might tell me because CBSSports.com, I'm not even going to get into it. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out. Also, hit the thumbs up button if you like the video. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode here off the Daily Huddle.